Horizon Forbidden West has one of the weirdest intros to a game I have ever experienced. The first few hours are spent being bombarded by tutorials and exposition that is nowhere near as interesting as the game thinks it is. You're restricted to a purely linear experience, as long outdated mechanics are thrown at you left and right. Ah, bushes, where creativity goes to die. The only thing that pushes you to continue is the promise of what's to come, permanently imprinted on the horizon. Pun absolutely fucking intended. But luckily, that's the end of my negativity, because eventually the open world opens. And you venture out to find this little town, and from there you're free to explore. And so if you're like me, you find this little spot at the top of the map and you discover that's the end of the map, so you're kinda stuck. So you keep going down, and then you find more enemy types, and then you find more weapons, and then you find Lemmy, and then you find traversal and more locations, and then when you've got nothing left to find, you finally make your way to where you're supposed to go, which is scary because this is where you will find minor spoilers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you find this bad guy, and this battle kicks off out of nowhere, and freaking everyone's just dying, and oh my god, it's about to go down. And then you have this boss battle with this turtle dude, and you grab his shell, which you can fly with for some reason, and then the game's like, and this is the Forbidden West. And you're like, hell yeah, dude. And then the map does this. And I immediately stopped playing it. Now, I did eventually go back, and I'm glad I did, as I loved this game. It's incredible. But when a world is so open like that, fatigue sets in before I even set out.
Like Aloy said, this is only the beginning.
When open worlds finally open up, I can't help but feel a cold shiver run down my spine. Engaging with the content that's on offer is an exciting prospect, don't get me wrong. But the extent of that content is what always seems to terrify me. I prefer when games leave the breadth of their content to the imagination. I enjoy the intrigue of the unknown. Horizon tries to hide the specificity of its content, but it fails to get you excited for it. Ironically, most of the content on offer is actually fairly entertaining. This might be trauma-informed from my Assassin's Creed addiction, but I actually enjoy climbing tall necks. There's something psychologically intoxicating about climbing something high and observing the expanse of what's below. Or should I say, Horizon. However, while I enjoy reaching the peak of Horizon's beautiful world, that is also kind of the peak of its gameplay. The way the world of Horizon is built, all content must bring equal value to the player. A treasure hunt cannot be objectively more enjoyable than climbing a tall neck because some players just won't interact with it. If players don't interact with it, then the resources it took to build that content is wasted. That's at least how I view it. Horizon tried so hard to build its world around mass appeal so that everyone who plays it would get some form of value from their experience. Those who want to blitz through the story have their visually alluring tall necks to distract them when they need it, and the completionists among us have hours upon hours of varied content that should satisfy. On the surface, that is a perfect formula for an open world, but what I've come to realize is that mass appeal doesn't always make for a better game. The focus of Horizon's open world is spread too thin. It wants to be a Ubisoft game with its towers and viewpoints. It wants to be a CD Projekt Red game with NPC branches and reactivity. It wants to be a BioWare game with its endless resource gathering and unnecessary commitment to its crafting systems.
Stop it! It's time to stop it. Just stop it. You have to stop it!
And it wants to be a monolith game with its sheer abundance of map markers. But Horizon is none of those things. It's an incredible game with a fascinating narrative, mind-blowing creature design, and remarkable combat mechanics. But because of just how big its open world is, I would sometimes just forget about all that. Horizon's open world is absolutely mesmerizing, but I just wish it was a little smaller. Now, of course, this is just personal preference. I'm not trying to convince you either way. Games like Red Dead and Assassin's Creed Origins have huge open worlds, that are also compelling at the same time, and that's before you even start talking about their sequels. I find that the curse of open world games is their reliance upon systems rather than mechanics. Every open world game needs a crafting system, or dialogue trees, or player progression, or dynamic NPC interactivity, but they neglect the basic stuff, like how it feels to move through the world. 60 hours of riding a horse, or a horse, or a horse, or even a horse does tend to get old. Very quickly. That's why open world games like Spider-Man, or even, dare I say it, Forspoken, are a breath of fresh air. Traversing an open world is what you'll be doing the majority of the time, so it astounds me how little innovation we see in the industry at the moment when it comes to traversal mechanics. The moment-to-moment gameplay of open world games is hamstrung by the scope of their worlds. I find myself more engrossed by what I can do in an open world game than what I actually do. And nowhere is this more depressingly apparent than with Dragon Age Inquisition. Without the dialogue of Dragon Age Inquisition, I would have been the most disappointed man alive.
Well, Bianca's excited.
The combat lacked the flavour of its predecessor and the depth of the original. Its open world NPCs were plentiful but meaningless and instantly forgettable. The moment-to-moment gameplay was regressing, and the narrative really couldn't make up for it. Dragon Age Inquisition wasn't just a bigger game than what came before, it was monstrous. Its open world was colossal, expanding the scope of its world to unparalleled heights. But it did do something interesting. Its open world, its massive, ridiculously massive open world wasn't very open. Playing through the game would net you power points with the titular Inquisition. With these power points, and by completing certain side quests and objectives, of which there are too many, the game and its world would open up. There are numerous regions, roadblocks, and paths that through your efforts can be either unlocked or opened up. The first time you visit an area, you might be met with a bridge that needs building, or debris that needs destroying. This can be done through moment-to-moment gameplay, but a lot of the time, it requires you to return to your war table and spend power points that you've accumulated in order to unlock that locked-off area. Now, a quick interpretation of this system is that it is basically an easy way to build player retention. The game is literally blocking off parts of the world for no other reason than to ensure that you play the game more to unlock more content. It's pretty gross, but as much as it pains me to say this, it was one of my favourite parts about this game. Through this system, the game was able to maintain a linear style open world progression while also creating vastly distinct environments. Through this system, the game was able to facilitate the return to every area of the game at every point of your playtime. A region you discovered early on in the game would still have content left for you to discover when you came back towards the end of the game.
Let's look around.
While the open world of Dragon Age Inquisition was gigantic, it did feel somewhat focused. I felt like through my gameplay, I was opening up the world. I was unlocking doors and paving the path of its world, and it would then reveal its scope to me. While its open world was big, it tried its best to feel small. This illusion is what makes me so excited about an open world game. It's an invitation to explore rather than an annoyance to ignore. Unfortunately, the actual content of Dragon Age Inquisition was incredibly annoying, and so I definitely ignored it. But one thing I'm noticing within myself recently is the ever-present pull to leave these worlds and discover new ones. Smaller ones with open-ended gameplay but linear level design that grow upon the worlds in which they are set. And I think this is why I'm falling in love with the Metroidvania genre, because they deliver on everything I want from an open world game without necessarily being open world. They begin, mostly, in a strictly linear fashion. Through your efforts and exploration, they begin to open up, and areas you've previously visited will still usually serve a purpose. But they also highlight the importance of traversal, so making your way through that world is engaging throughout every moment of gameplay. And because all of us are motivated to move through a world as quickly as possible, traversal can have a rather high skill ceiling, which means you're not just actively progressing your power through systems, but mechanical skill. You're actively learning how to get the most out of the game while playing it. But most importantly, Metroidvanias are smaller games with a narrow focus. Whether it's through traversal, combat, or puzzles, most Metroidvanias attempt to excel in a chosen direction, rather than becoming a jack of all trades. So sure, they won't appeal to everyone, but they appeal to me. As I'm beginning to build my love for linearity in the games that I play, I'm beginning to learn about what games desperately need it. And ironically, the game that desperately needs to be linear is part of a franchise that always was. Diablo 4. Is a great game in so many ways. The sound design, the presentation, the environment, the combat feel. There are so many amazing things about Diablo 4, and none of them have anything to do with the open world.
Get over here!
Don't get me wrong, it's dense with enemies and dynamic events, but it is huge. Is it necessary? Does the open world of Diablo 4 need to be open? I would argue, no. No, it doesn't. And here's why. The peak of Diablo 4 gameplay is in its density, in its dungeons, in its destruction. Expanding the world of Diablo 4 only stretches its density. A lot of the game is spent traveling from point to point, to complete content that is needlessly spread out. The world is only bigger because other games are bigger. The intoxication of an open world is the freedom it provides to the player. The ability to venture out wherever you want to do whatever you wish, however long it takes you. But Diablo 4's core mechanical foundation does not properly facilitate an open world. The end game of Diablo 4 is in direct conflict with its open world, as players speed through its world in order to progress their character, as is synonymous with Diablo. The Diablo franchise and other ARPGs like it rely on their dedication to player progression and maximizing efficiency in their gameplay. The open world is an immediately inefficient hindrance to Diablo 4 gameplay. So much time was spent on the presentation, the environment design, the regional narratives, but they don't get the attention they deserve because of the genre that Diablo 4 is a part of. I'm not saying players don't appreciate them or avoid them. I spent most of my time with them because narrative is my number one priority in a game. But I do believe the open world of Diablo 4 hurts the gameplay and its pacing. Would making it linear have helped it? I don't know. But we do have 3 massively successful games to draw evidence from, as well as the rest of the ARPG genre. And what I do know is that if it was linear, it would have had a much more narrow focus, which I believe would have helped it transition from campaign to endgame. Thanks for watching. As always, if you've got any feedback, good and bad, let me know. I'm always looking to improve, and I'll see you in the next one.